Well, hello. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co host, Jim Gurley. And yeah, we had a nice pregame, but we always have a nice pregame, Jim. And you brought a word to a self hyphenated word as a topic, which was kind of our thing now. And it happened to kind of tie in nicely to my recent experience. I had a recent visit to my daughters who are now in their 30s, young adults, and we have some disagreements, mostly around politics, and it got a little heated. And and I think it's because all three of us have the some of this word that we're using today in us, which is self-conviction. And it's a Jim found a real cool definition. So let me read that quick, Jim, and then I'll toss the mic to you. Um, Self-conviction is the unwavering belief in your own ideas, values, and judgment, even when faced with external pressure, doubt, or contradictory opinions. It is more than just confidence. It's an internal certainty that serves as a compass for your actions. And one of the things we're going to talk about, Jim, is the difference between self-conviction and just plain being stubborn. And because both of us kind of hit on it that in the pregame, there's a fine line. So I'll throw it over to you, but I appreciate you grabbing that topic. It's chock full of topics.
Yeah, Mark, again, it fits into our library of selves as that library continues to grow. Every time I find a word, I put self hyphen in it, and it just has a completely different meaning. So I think this is my new favorite one. Of course, self-awareness is number one. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our framework of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast, the imperfection is the perfection. Every week we use a framework that was created a few years ago, but just seems to get, I think, better and more curated as time goes on, and that we break up our lives, whether we're aware of it or not, into five categories, no particular order. And the first one is our profession, our life's work. It defines us as a man. That's why it's called the Imperfect Men's Club. It's a men's club because a lot of our identity is built on our life's work, typically our career. Um, and the other ones are, again, no particular order, our relationship with ourselves. So that's our mental health, our physical health. That plays out every day and how we interact with the world, our relationship with the world, which is a subcategory of our childhood. That has a lot to do with where we grew up, when we grew up, our heritage, our spirituality. Those are all part of our relationship with the world. And then, but everything seems to become about, especially right now, is our world with um, the politics, and that in America, that's the red team and the blue team. Although this is not a political show, it seems to be often related to political shows of what's going on in the world. But so yeah, so that's our worldview is very much, especially as we get older, related to our political views. And although I think Mark doesn't claim to be on the blue team, he'd be on the dark red team. I'd like to think of myself on the purple team, which is probably more it become
Yeah,
more red
it's
over the years. Yeah.
well, I think Jim, the I appreciate you framing it up because the framework really is it's so helpful when you talk to other people about the podcast to
Mhm.
you see them light up when you describe the framework. It puts things in order for people and it makes people more clear on what it is we're trying to do, which is really just share our observations about life
Yeah, yeah, it is. And
and
I'll mention the last one, and then like it's very related to the center of this. And I remember you, Mark, holding up your hand one day and saying, even though it was radiant thinking, you held up your hand and you said, and you pointed to the center of your palm and you said, you mean in the center, and that's the self.
Mhm.
And then the first self was self-awareness. But the other two I didn't mention was our relationship with money.
Mhm.
And that is typically has a lot to do with your childhood, a lot of other things, but it's abundance or scarcity, and it's a driver of who we are very much. But
Mhm.
today is going to probably fall into the relationship with others, and we specifically created two subcategories on every one of these areas. There's two subcategories, but the difference, the relationship we have with the world and the relationship we have with women versus men, starting off with our mothers, our significant others, our sisters, our wives, girlfriends, daughters. That's a very different relationship than our fathers, our uncles, our brothers, or whatever that is, our friends. And so we specifically separate those because that's going on whether we're self-aware or not. And today's topic, I think, is going to fall into a bit of both. And that's, as we grow older, because the podcast, the Imperfect Men's Club, is really focusing on to live your best self in your mid 30s, mid 40s, mid 50s, and now in our in our 60s. I'm not mid 60s yet, but and the difference between being the difference of self conviction and then also being seen as stubborn or even maybe outdated in some people's eyes. So these relationships um, change over time, and particularly with the ones closest to us. So I'll let you kind of take it from there as far as how that
Yeah,
relates to what's going on in your life,
but
Mark, and the conversation in the pregame. Uh,
yeah, I think what I when you always ask me how I'm doing, and sometimes I say I'm great, and sometimes I don't. And I think I just try to be honest, particularly with you and our listeners. I mean, what's the sense of bullshit in anybody? Fine never means fine, so I try to stay away from that word. But yeah, I think there's a combination of things going on. There were a couple of events in my life. There was a Holocaust related book speech that I watched that was it's a pretty heavy topic. The division in the country politically, so we'll have a little political stuff in this one. I'm sure we always do. And then a visit that I made to my daughters a couple weekends ago. That's kind of still it's kind of a little bit of a dark cloud hanging over me. And it was, full transparency. We just disagree vehemently on a couple of political things, but not on much else. And
mhm.
it got a little more personal than it ever has. And I might as well just share the topic was they can't get off of their distaste, would be kind, I would say hatred of Donald Trump. And I was trying to take the conversation to why. I don't know the guy. I've never met the guy. You've never met the guy. Why is that personal? Why isn't it about policy and procedure and things that are being done as opposed to said? And it just never came back to that. And I'm sure that if the outside world were looking in, that they would call all of us stubborn. And when I say it that way, it's almost a compliment. I raised them to be stubborn. I raised them to be independent thinkers. I raised them to be strong. I raised them to stand for things. One of my dad's favorite sayings is, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, you
Mhm.
know? And, I think that on the Trump side of that topic, you brought a quote to this conversation I'll read now, and then we can start breaking down, as you like to say, the self-conviction, the anatomy of that word, and the difference between self-conviction and stubbornness. But it's Charles Bukowski, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's an American poet and author, and the quote was, "We kill our leaders, be worth being killed." And we could go deep on just that quote alone,
Yeah.
Jim,
Yeah,
in the context of Trump. But that's the frame. That's how the conversation started. So I'll
mhm.
throw it back to you.
Yeah, I used to use it all the time in my daily interactions. I recently just kind of forgot about it, but in relationship to what's going on, like you said, in the world and leadership, and whether you take a position in support of what's going on in Iran, the American position or the current administration position is, you realize that when you have to make really hard decisions or you have self-conviction, that it's not going to always go over with everybody. That's the difference. You referred to it as leadership. It is a form of leadership, but I
Mm-hmm.
think to be a good leader, you have to have self-conviction. And I learned this early on in life. As either the captain of the football team or captain of my rugby team or the president of my rugby club or owning a business. Um, we kill our leaders, be worth being killed. I used to always, also always say that to my kids because it reminds them if you're going to do something, um, you're always, if it's really good, it's going to come with some resistance. I believe the origin of it, or at least it inspired me when it was a Robert Greene book, I believe, or one of his talks, the 48 Laws of Power, and he was referring to Martin Luther King and other great leaders that, and he talked about them physically being killed. It's true, right?
Hmm.
Even you mentioned uh, who was just murdered. The
Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk. That's a really good example of we kill our leaders because his message was so strong and so powerful that they physically killed him. But it's not about just being physically killed. They'll try to shame you. They'll try to embarrass you. Anytime you take on the establishment or you do its resistance, then they're going to come after you. And it may not be
Yeah.
physically, it'll be in other
Yeah.
ways. But if you don't have a strong self conviction, then you will not have the stamina, you will not have the strength to push through that, and then eventually make change or have an impact on the world. And so yeah, I finally found the origin of where that quote comes from. But I think I practice it every day. When things get difficult, you have to make a decision. You're going to quit because you were convinced of something else, or you let somebody else persuade you to think differently, or you're going to learn by those mistakes or learn by others' input, and then move on, but stay firm in your self conviction.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the most interesting parts of this conversation is the nuance
Mhm.
in the differences between being just plain stubborn and being having self conviction. And so I think this section of copy here that you brought to the conversation. Let me begin it's called the anatomy of self conviction. I
Yeah,
think
this is well. If you could read the definition of self conviction, because I think every time I hear a word that I used to use in my daily vocabulary, I always like to run it through AI or even a Google search to
hmm
get the modern minute definition, and it's so interesting because it changes, right? Like all definitions do. It changes because of the stage I'm at in my life, but also it updates it. And I do think that at this stage in our life, we have to be careful to become outdated in terms of our thoughts and our perspectives. So
Yeah,
yeah, if you
yeah.
could read
Well,
that,
and again, to remind the audience, I think it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. Your neurodivergence is you hearing things is again is more helpful for you.
Mhm,
So I think that's awesome.
mhm.
Let me read it.
And having
So
access to it on my fingertips on my phone versus having to go to a library and get a book and then read the book and then
mhm.
interpret. It's just, again, it's such an exciting time to be alive with AI.
Yeah, life changing. Yeah,
It is.
life changing. So self conviction is the unwavering belief in your own ideas, values, and judgment, even when faced with external pressure, doubt, or contradictory opinions. It's more than just confidence, it's an internal certainty that serves as a compass for your actions. It's I've been called stubborn my whole life, and I always found it to be a compliment. I also think the other thing that strikes me about this conversation is that people that are above you, whatever that might mean, making more money, more successful, more famous, whatever that means to you, they're not the ones that criticize. They're not the
Mhm.
ones that challenge you. If they're challenging you, they're challenging you to catch up. They're not criticizing you down. It's the people that are down low punching up at the people that are farther along. And I
Mhm.
think that I'm such a huge fan of just the nuance of communication. I think that understanding that where who if one of the things about self-conviction is this kind of resilience to skepticism, then you have to that's why the nuance is so cool. But let's break down the anatomy of self-conviction.
Yeah, but before that, Mark, there's something else that was a part of that. I really thought it was a great takeaway, and was why confidence is often a feeling about your abilities, comma, self-conviction is a commitment to your truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's that grabbed me in a different way. I think it's again staying true to your truths, what you believe is true, and knowing that you're going to be challenged about that. But the word confidence really applies to your self conviction. You have to have a high level of confidence to stay true to your self convictions. and and your abilities to either articulate that or to at least have the abilities to do the background and due diligence about a particular subject or something. I'll speak to this a little bit in that, as I mentioned in the pregame, I have, um, I think it's five issued patents, or yeah, one's pending. But the reason I share that is because these are ideas, sometimes man, 30 years ago, that take decades and thousands of hours of development and thought, and then that's just to get patented, and then to get it to that point to license it, and then to sell it is just it's almost doesn't make sense. Any logical person wouldn't do it. The reason I'm sharing that with you is because one of them I had licensed to some company. Long story. I'll spare you from that, but it's back on the market, and it hit the market last month. So after years of development and the company I licensed it to, we had a conversation yesterday, the owner of the company, and he was saying that it went viral one day at 150,000 views of that product. So I don't get involved in that part of it. I learned early on selling my own patents is like trying to sell my kids, right? It's too much part of me. It's too emotional. I could sell other things, but I don't get involved in the marketing of those products intentionally. But the point is, I had a tremendous amount of conviction that this needed to get commercialized and go to the market. And so many times I wanted to quit. So many times things went wrong. And so, we'll see how it goes. It's so far it's going good. It's just starting. But it's not always just about, of course, I want the royalties and the success, that the financial success it brings. But it is just knowing that it finally is back out on the market. Because remember, my first one, is still on the market and sold millions and millions of units. But that first patent was issued in 1997. So, and I think this one is better, but it's just an example of how so many times I wanted to quit, and that's
Well,
what's inspired this.
that's part of the nuance of the conversation is like
Yeah, it is.
there are times when it makes sense to quit, when it's better that
Yeah,
you're
it's
cutting your
logical.
losses.
Sure.
You've invested time and money in something that just
Yeah.
isn't working. It's not
Mhm.
working out like you thought it was going to. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, myself included, have hung on to too many things for too long,
Yep. Yep.
because self-conviction can work to your disadvantage as
Yeah.
well. Maybe
And
that's,
sunken costs, to your point. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
sunken cost, sunken time, everything. But,
Mhm.
and that's, how do you make those decisions? Well, I think it goes back to, what you gloss over for this purposes of limited time, I imagine,
Mhm.
story is that, you spent 25, 30 years learning about this craft of cabinet making and kitchen installation and
Mhm.
everything related to that.
Right. Right.
All of that, you're not starting this process from scratch. You're starting it with
Mhm.
all this ideation and all this experience
Yeah.
and
No.
all these mistakes
Yeah.
that you've learned from.
Yeah.
So that's probably where that conviction comes from.
Yeah.
It's like,
No.
I remember
Yeah.
when I started my first company, I've told you this story before. My father, who flew airplanes for the same company for 40 years,
Mhm.
didn't even know what it was like to look for another job, right? He only worked for
Mhm.
the same. He thought I
Right.
was crazy, right? This guy that I loved and trusted was telling me not to
Yeah.
do this
Yeah. He
thing.
was a military person. So then he went to a company very different than being an entrepreneur, which you were, right?
He had no framework for what I was
None.
about to do.
See,
And
my
I
father was
had
same because he was a
my
government
my
employee.
old boss, who you've talked to, Paul,
Yep.
said
Paul.
to me when I
Yep.
first started working
Great
for him,
guy.
it's going to take you 5 years to even know what you're doing in this business. And what's interesting about that 5 year comment? That's also 10,000 hours, which is, I think,
Oh,
Malcolm
interesting.
Gladwell's
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
10,000 hours
You
to
bet.
become an expert. We
Yeah.
both put in a few of those 10,000 hours sprints into what we're doing today. And
Yeah.
I'm just basically I'm not patenting anything, but I'm bringing a service to the market
Yep.
based on all of that experience. So I have very strong convictions about how good I am at what I do, but it's not based on a whim. It's based on a ton of work and a
Well,
ton of
it's also what the
research over a
market
lot.
just gets to decide, not us as individuals,
That's
right?
right.
So,
That's
but yeah,
right.
let's break this down. This autonomy, I think, was helpful. Autonomy of anything is good because it makes you visualize. the
Well, I'm
components.
going to correct you right there. We can have a laugh. It's not autonomy, it's anatomy.
of- Thank you. I don't know why I keep saying that. Yeah, that's my neurodiversity,
There you
kind
go.
of showing itself. But
The
that's why
imperfection.
you want to surround yourself with people that are better at that things that you're not. So thank you
Yeah,
for catching that.
I read good, so we're good.
Yeah.
So the anatomy of self-conviction, to understand how it functions, it helps to look at its core components. And this particular source material suggests that there are three core components: internal validation, resilience to skepticism, and alignment with action. So those deserve a little bit of attention each, I think.
Hmm.
Internal validation, you don't require consensus or social proof to believe that a path is correct. The validation
Hmm.
comes from your own reasoning and principles. And that's the
Hmm.
work that we were just talking about, you know?
Yeah, and if like I said, we'll make comments and move through these quickly, but that's a big part of it because especially in innovation, as an inventor, you're creating things that don't exist.
Hmm.
So if you're looking for social proof or you're looking for input, you're asking somebody to make give you an opinion or a comment on something that they've never seen before. It it doesn't work that way. You have to have a self conviction that you're going to bring it to a point where then you can get some feedback. And even sometimes that's not the best feedback. So
Yeah,
that's a
it's
super important
trial and error. Mine, in my circumstances, it's the uniqueness of what I do, and the uniqueness of
one.
what I do is based on two things: my experience, my life experience, what have I been through,
Mhm.
and the amount of time I spent doing that, and my personality, and
Yeah.
my approach to what I deliver. Hopefully, would suggest to the world, or at least my prospects, that if you want what I have, the only place you can get it is from me, because
Hmm.
my experience is unique.
Yeah.
The
Internal validation. Get it.
Yeah.
I
So
get
the
it.
resilience to skepticism is the next one. And that's when others question your direction, self-conviction prevents you from drifting. You can
Hmm.
listen to feedback without it eroding your foundational belief.
Hmm.
Yeah, that goes back to the story about my dad. That was a trusted source that was telling me he thought I was crazy. And I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Interesting about the skepticism too. And this fits right into our framework about, uh, it opens up a whole other conversation but about advice. And I think some of the worst advice I've ever received was from the people closest to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't because they had bad intentions, but it was just not the right person to ask that question at that time. And
Yeah, well, they also have they're too close to it. They're too emotional about it.
well,
This is a big deal. I mean, when I was going around asking people questions about what I should do during my divorce because I had no fucking idea what was going on for a long
yeah,
time. I I wasn't asking anybody that had already been through a divorce. I was asking
yeah,
people that had no idea what it was like, you know?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It reminds me of the conversations. I have a very good relationship with my mother, always have. But I also look back and realize that she's talked me out of more things because she was trying to protect me
yeah, yeah,
uh, from failing,
yeah.
and and that's a luckily, I resisted not like giving her all advice, but she's also probably checked me from going too far. But I think that's a great example, right? They have especially as your mother, people close to you, they don't want to see you fail. So
Hmm.
they're going to try to protect you by talking you out of things that you otherwise would do if not for them,
Well, and
which can be good too. It's not just all bad, but that's a common response I'll get, from my mother or often the
yeah.
people around you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's also, it's interesting. Anyway, to your point, a whole story for another conversation. But
Yeah.
the third component of the anatomy of self-conviction is the alignment with action.
Mhm.
This is consistent, Jim, with some of the things that we kind of enjoy talking about. Alignment in general is kind of one of our favorite words, one of mine anyway. Conviction is rarely passive. It acts as a catalyst, driving you to execute on your ideas because you believe their success is inevitable or their pursuit is non-negotiable.
Mhm.
One of the things that I start guys off with in my coaching stuff is just that self-reflection and self-reflection in one case on what are your values. And
Mhm.
I think, we kid ourselves about what our values are sometimes. We don't readdress our values very often as we go through life. That's been my experience.
Mhm.
And I don't think we always, like one of the examples I use is you think you're honest. Okay, have you ever lied to somebody? All right, well, you're not always honest. So
Mhm.
I'm not, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm just saying that's a perfect example of how to talk about are your actions in alignment with your values?
Hmm.
And I think it's a great exercise because when
Yeah,
your
yeah.
actions,
Just, but Mark, to add to that, if you think about the framework that we've created, just the visual framework of these 5 areas of your life, and the center being the self-awareness, it's all about alignment. It's alignment with all those um, components of that are going on in your life, whether you're aware of it or not, and then doing the best you can. It's never perfect to align those, because if you know, if your mental health isn't right, then your finances may not be right, or your relationship with others isn't going to be right, your relationship with the world's not right, and certainly the relationship with your career is not right. So they're all connected, and it is about alignment. What I find is, by nature, I think men typically don't have a let's say a forum, or a group that they can have these conversations with, which is really why we started the podcast, right? The
yes,
imperfection is
yeah,
the perfection. So it's a club. It's a club that maybe, I guess, you'd used to get the advice from the guy at the bar on a bar stool, but that's not always the best. After 5 or 6 drinks, you probably aren't getting the best advice.
yeah, yeah. Well, it might sound like the best advice after five
At
drinks,
the time, it certainly does. Yeah.
but don't write it down. Um,
If you can remember it, yeah.
Well, I think the other thing is that's not a static principle, right? There's
Yeah.
alignment and then there's realignment, right? Because
Yeah.
circumstances might change things. Your growing older might change things.
Yeah.
The
Perspective,
people you
no
surround
question.
yourself might change. So realignment is, I think, equally as important as alignment, and it's kind of
Mhm.
like, it's kind of like a checkup every once in a while, and the
Yeah.
framework makes that
Yeah,
much
yeah.
easier.
It also makes me think, and I've been saying it more, and I'm glad I do. When somebody does ask for my opinion or advice, I immediately make it a point to say, "Hey, I'm honored that you've asked me for that, but I want to be really clear. I stopped giving advice um, years ago, and the reason I stopped giving advice is because I don't know. I all I have is my life lived experiences, and they may or may not apply to yours. What I do have is perspective. I have, I believe, some wisdom of making a lot of mistakes and seeing the outcomes. And now I'll even add to that. I've seen a lot of movies, and I'm talking about not like movies in the theater, where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end and an outcome. And I'd be happy to share that with you the best I can in relationship to your question. But it is perspective.
Yeah,
And
it's
we,
they people are much more interested in your observations, I think, and how you got there than they
yep.
are in your opinions or your advice about anything. And because
Hmm.
there's way too much shitty advice out there,
Hmm.
and I don't
But the
want to be a
self convictions
contributor to
from
that.
comes from gathering that information and then having convictions for your beliefs. That's your decision.
Hmm.
Sure, I can maybe help you get to that point, but that should be yours as whoever I'm speaking to,
Yeah,
especially.
this is where I was. This is where I
Yeah,
got to. This is how I got there. Here are
yeah,
were the forks in the road. Here where the decisions were to be made. Here's
yeah,
why I made these decisions. That's a much healthier conversation than this is what I think you should do. You
yeah.
know.
No
So
question.
the last kind of component of this is a comparative analysis. It's brief, but it's the difference between self-conviction and stubbornness. And I think, Jim, for the essence of time, let me just go through them all and then we can reflect back on them.
Okay.
I think because here are the qualifications of being stubborn. It would include these. There's foundation to it. There's a willingness to be open about it, and there's your energy as you approach it. And self-conviction is kind of marked by it's based on first principles and deep reasoning. Okay, that your openness is that you're willing to update the how if the why remains true. And
Hmm.
finally, that your energy is quiet, you're steady, and you're focused. And that same person, if he or she were to be considered stubborn, would have these different qualities. The foundation is based on your ego or a desire to be right all the time.
Hmm.
Your openness approach is that you reject all outside input, regardless of the quality of the input, and that your energy is typically defensive, loud, or reactive. And
Hmm.
and man, that makes me go a lot of different places. I think this topic is what the whole world is struggling with right now.
Hmm.
And I think if I were to look at it a little bit differently or think about it a little bit differently, and I say this to you all the time, I think there's people that come to discussion or disagreement in particular with a level of self-conviction. And I think those people are well researched, basing what they're saying on metrics or data or historical evidence and repetition of patterns, things of that nature, more of a scientific kind of approach. And I think people that are stubborn just come at this thing with emotion, right? It's
Mhm.
like their energy is, they're defensive, they're loud, they're reactive, they're not really listening. They want to be right, they don't want to learn. And I think that really sums up one of the biggest challenges we have, certainly as a country, but probably as a world as well right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll kind of wrap it up because, like you said, we're short on time. But I think that the difference between self-conviction and stubbornness is ego, and it being they may in our minds be one of the same, but it's really more how you come off. So it's if you have a strong ego or you take a position of privilege over somebody else, it 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 looks like stubbornness. That's different than self-conviction, where you want to have a conversation about it. You're looking for opportunities to have a thoughtful exchange of thoughts and ideas to learn from one another versus making a statement and then expecting everybody to agree with you. It's not easy to do, but I think it is a skill set, to
Well, you said it earlier in the pregame, and I'll just repeat it because I think it was very valid. And this is leadership under a microscope, right? It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
if you're great leaders are quiet, great leaders listen more than they
Mhm.
talk. Great leaders are interested in the opinions of the people that they
Mhm.
lead, and they're not defensive and they're not
Mhm.
loud, and they will change their position on things, but only with
Yeah.
data to support the change. They have an openness about it. They're not just making changes on whim.
Mhm.
So I really think leadership is fully exposed when you put it under the microscope of is this person stubborn or do
Mhm.
they have strong
Mhm.
self-conviction? One's a
But
leader and one's
in
not.
the context of let's say politics, when it's sound bites and it's media channels with narratives that they're trying to maintain that use words that you said and take them out of context, it sounds easy. It's very difficult if you're making public statements in order to have that to be persuasive without offending somebody else. It's kind of sad. I think that's what your frustration when we talked about the media, is created an industry of division um, by using the either self-confidence and then create conflict among one another's. But
Well, I think
anyway,
you can drop into stubbornness even if you're more or less a self-conviction guy.
yeah,
But that's the realignment phase. That's like self-awareness, self-reflection. Oh, that's I shouldn't have said that that way,
yep,
or that was the wrong time to say. You're holding yourself accountable. You can't deny that you're human. You're flawed. You're gonna make mistakes. But
yep.
it's more like, can I play most of the time in the self-conviction space and try and avoid most of the time the stubborn space? Because if you're self-convicted, you're also confident. So your ego is going to want to sneak in there whether you want it to or not. You know,
I agree. Good way to wrap it up. Until next
sounds
week,
good.
Mark.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jim. You too.
Bye.
See you.